Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Your Neighbor on the Left podcast. I am your host, Don Spielis. Happy to be back here for episode 2. We've got a lot of really interesting stuff to get to today. We're going to talk about your friend and mine, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and the current to-do that's coming out of there, thanks to him. We're also going to talk about President Trump's appeal of his defamation lawsuit against E. Jean Carroll and what that means for you and me. We're going to talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene today. Marjorie Taylor Greene, my least favorite Republican congressperson, and what she's been up to this past Easter weekend. And for today's deep dive, we're going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If you're even halfway paying attention to the news, you'll know he's been up to his usual nonsense in the past week or so, and we're going to do a deep dive on our Health and Human Services Director. Real quick before we jump into the hot topics, I just wanted to mention that the Your Neighbor on the Left podcast has a Linktree site out there for you where you can find the links to all of our different appearances on the web and social media, including Threads, Instagram, Facebook. The URL for the Linktree page is linktr.ee/neighbor on the left. That's linktr.ee/neighbor on the left. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, or if you're not enjoying the podcast and you want to let me know, these are the best ways to accomplish that. You can send messages via Threads, Instagram, or Facebook, and let me know what your thoughts are, what questions you might have, so on and so forth. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's jump right into this week's hot topics. The first of which has to deal with Pete Hegseth, our embattled defense secretary. If you recall, last month there was widespread news coverage about a signal chat that had various members of the Trump cabinet included in it and talked about details of a bombing campaign that was to be carried out in Yemen against Houthis terrorists. As the story went, a reporter for the Atlantic magazine was mistakenly added to that chat, which included, despite the denials of the administration, what most military experts would describe as classified information about the attack plans. After that, aside from a lot of grinding and gnashing of teeth and denials, as I said, from the administration, nothing much seems to have come of that. But now it appears, based on an anonymous source, that there was a second signal chat covering the same information, and this one was created by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. More incredible is that it included his wife, his personal attorney, and his brother, and is said to have included the same types of information as the previous one, including time schedules and weaponry and attack plans in general. Again, the official stance from the Pentagon, in as much as it's what Pete Hegseth is saying, is that nothing classified was included on the chat. I'm not exactly sure how many times this is going to happen where the debate won't be whether or not the information was shared. The debate won't be whether or not it was shared on a third-party app that's unsecure. The issue being taken to task is whether or not the information was actually classified. Again, every military expert, former, who has been interviewed or has weighed in, has said, of course, this information is classified. When you're talking about flight schedules for the FA-18 Hornets that are targeting Yemen, and you talk about it before it happens, I don't think it's a stretch that everyone understands that that type of information, if it were to fall into the wrong hands, could be detrimental to the plan. It is the very definition of classified information. The whistleblower also went on to say that this chat was not conducted on Hegseth's government issue phone, which we would assume probably has more security protocols in it than his personal phone, which was the phone that was used to carry on this chat. Strangely missing from all the conversation about this is whether it was classified or not, and it was, but whether or not it was, why is he sharing this information with his wife and his personal attorney? Democratic Senator from Illinois, Tammy Duckworth, herself a veteran wounded in combat, was quoted as saying, "Every day he stays in this job is another day our troops' lives are endangered by his singular stupidity." Now, in conjunction with this particular topic, there was also an opinion piece written for Politico by a gentleman by the name of John Uliot. Uliot is a former chief Pentagon spokesperson. And when I say former, I mean very recently former. He resigned last week. This opinion piece in Politico paints a scathing picture of the disarray and chaos under Hegseth's leadership. Uliot describes himself as a friend and backer of Hegseth. But then he says, quote, "Yet even strong backers of the secretary like me must admit the last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon, and it's becoming a real problem for the administration." He goes on to state that recent firings that were reported to the media as being done for leaking, that the fired personnel were leaking information, Uliot says this is not the case. He states that the firings were for other reasons that were not released to the public, and even questioned how much investigation had been done before the firings occurred. Uliot goes on to explain to readers that he is a big supporter of President Trump, and he believes that the way that the administration is approaching defense and foreign policy is the way to go. That being said, he ended his piece with this, quote, "The president deserves better than the current mishigas at the Pentagon. Given his record of holding prior cabinet leaders accountable, many in the secretary's own inner circle will applaud quietly if Trump chooses to do the same in short order at the top of the Defense Department." Now, the only thing I could say about replacing Pete Hegseth is that, based on other appointments that this administration has made, is we're not guaranteed of an improvement if Hegseth is out and somebody new is in. There haven't even been much rumblings, at least so far at the time of my recording this, as to who the next one might be if Trump decides to ask for Hegseth's resignation. But it's hard to deny at this point that Hegseth is a liability. He doesn't come off as an authoritative type of person. He comes off like what he was before he started doing this job, a TV host. He was a host at Fox and Friends Weekend for, yes, he was in the military. Yes, I believe he did go to West Point. But I think the thing to remember is that secretaries of defense in the past tend to be individuals who are steeped in military knowledge and have much more experience than having been in the military before they are put at the top of the food chain. For Hegseth's part, he was interviewed at, I believe it was the Easter egg rolling festivities at the White House. Either way, it was an Easter interview with his young sons in the background, and he said what you would expect him to say, that it's all fake news and that you can't trust what former employees say, although I don't know if it's clear whether or not the leak came from a former employee, as the leaker was anonymous. And he just contends that it's all nonsense, and he sticks to this asinine semantic argument that it wasn't war plans. It doesn't matter what you call them. Let's be honest. War plans, you could call it dinner party guest list. You could call it instructions to assemble your entertainment center. If within the information it mentions strategic details about a pending attack, the name doesn't matter. It's the content that's the issue. One other funny thing about this is if you have an opportunity to pull up that interview on one of the various news sites, you'll see that as Hegseth talks to the camera, he's very animated. He turns his head to the left and the right. On one side, he has a long sideburn that looks to be about 2 or 3 inches long, and on the other side of his head, he has no sideburn. I don't know what any of that means in the grand scheme of things. It was just a very interesting look and added another level of ludicrousness to the entire story. Next, we'll move on to the story that came out this week regarding President Trump's desire to appeal a 2023 court ruling that did not go in his favor. If you're familiar with this story, you'll recall that he was sued in civil court by E. Jean Carroll. E. Jean Carroll is one of the slew of women who have accused Donald Trump of sexual impropriety and or assault over the years. Now, just to summarize real quick, it was a civil case. There was no legal criminality assigned to it. However, the details of the case were that Trump made public statements calling Ms. Carroll a liar, and she sued him for defamation. So during the course of the civil case, proof was offered that, in fact, she was not a liar, that she was, in fact, assaulted by Donald Trump. And in a court, a jury found that the plaintiff in this case, Ms. Carroll, proved her case, that she was, in fact, assaulted, and found for her to the tune of $83 million in damages that Donald Trump is now supposedly going to have to pay. However, knowing Donald Trump, as we all do after the last decade or more, he's not one to ever lose and just say, well, you got me, especially where money is concerned. So now he's appealing this decision. And that's not incredible in and of itself. It was almost expected. The incredible part is that the Justice Department, the U.S. Justice Department, is filing to intervene on Trump's behalf. They are claiming that something called the Westfall Act, which provides immunity to government employees for actions taken within the scope of their government duties, should apply to Trump, since some of the defamatory statements were made while he was the sitting president. This is like something out of a bad movie. They're saying that not that his statements weren't defamatory, not that they weren't lies, but they're saying that since he was the president, he can't be held liable for the lies because he has immunity under the Westfall Act. I it stupefies. It stupefies the amount of gall that this man has. But more to the point, this is the Justice Department. Any work that the Justice Department does on behalf of Trump's appeal for a civil lawsuit is paid for with tax dollars, our tax dollars. I struggle to find a word that describes how crazy this is. This is the administration that has been ramming waste, fraud, and abuse down our throats for the last 90 days or so. And here we are reading a news story where the Justice Department is going to use its time and resources that we pay for to intervene in a civil case appeal on behalf of Trump, and then not saying that the appeal is because he was wrongly found liable or because he didn't lie, but because he lied, but he can't be held accountable because he was president while he lied about sexually assaulting a woman. It's cliche, but if you watched a movie and this was the plot, you'd turn it off and say, this is ridiculous. This is nonsense. But here we are, 2025. This is our reality. And to add icing to the top of this nonsense cake is the idea that I've yet to speak to a Trump supporter who gives any credibility to any of the court rulings against the president. Whether you're talking about the 34 felony convictions, whether you're talking about civil suit losses, whether you're talking about the injunctions that judges have put on some of the things that the administration has tried to do since January 20th of this year, no one ever on that side seems to be able to say, yeah, he screwed up on that one. That one was wrong. Boy, he shouldn't have done that. And I don't understand why that is. I don't understand why, in order to support Donald Trump, you have to support 110% of Donald Trump. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. I definitely foresee a future episode of this podcast discussing this concept of why it has to be all or nothing where Trump is concerned, why so many of his loyalists can't pick anything out that they think is a misstep or a negative. It's fascinating. And, you know, so many of the folks who voted for Trump, they get really perturbed when the word cult gets thrown around. And I do think it gets thrown around a little bit frivolously by some. But when you think about it in these terms, where nothing that he does is ever seen as negative, what other word comes to mind? Whether or not it technically qualifies as a cult, can you blame anyone who thinks of that word in this context? Okay, so our third and final hot topic of this episode deals with the Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene is an anomaly because she does so much stupid stuff, says so many ridiculous things, draws so much negative attention to herself and her constituency by proxy that she, you think she would fall into that category where you just don't even pay attention anymore because it's just constant ridiculousness. But I guess to her credit, if you want to think about it that way, she manages to outdo herself on a regular basis and say things and do things that, she raises the bar for herself. And that was certainly the case this past Monday when it was announced that Pope Francis had passed away. Now, as a former Catholic and a history buff, the historical significance of his passing didn't escape me, and I think I think fondly of Pope Francis. I think he was a decent man, and I think he took a lot of strides to try and help marginalized populations gain some degree of acceptance and dignity. I don't think everything he did was right, and to be quite honest, I don't really understand the concept of a pope. Even having gone to Catholic school for 12 years, the concept still seems rather strange to me. But I don't think that arguing that Pope Francis was a good man is a stretch. Marjorie Taylor Greene disagrees with me on that point, to the extent that the morning that the news broke that the pontiff had passed away, Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted the following: "Today there were major shifts in global leaderships. Evil is being defeated by the hand of God." Where do I even begin? First, the idea that Marjorie Taylor Greene should be speaking with any sense of authority on what God is or isn't doing is laughable. She is one of the prime examples in today's government, certainly, but among people in general, of a professed Christian who acts nothing like Christ. It's difficult to discern from her tweet that what exactly her specific issues are with the Pope, other than we know that she was also a Catholic. She was brought up as a Catholic and no longer identifies as such, and has in the past been vocal about various topics that do not put the Catholic Church in a positive light. And it was looking one of these up that sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole into what Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks is godlike or Christ-like and what she doesn't. At one point in the past, Marjorie Taylor Greene was being interviewed, and she contended that bishops who are assisting illegal immigrants are controlled by Satan. Now, first of all, I got to tell you, I have a lot of discomfort with a sitting congressperson who is using phrases like controlled by the devil. Further, the idea that the litmus test for, or one of the litmus tests for whether or not you are controlled by the devil is the fact that you are a clergy person who is helping immigrants. But beyond the context of that statement, who she made the statement to is interesting. She was being interviewed by a website called Church Militant. If that name doesn't send a shiver down your spine, I'm not sure what does. Church Militant is a now defunct Detroit-based right-wing Christian website. Church Militant was known for being very vocal about clergy, specifically Catholic clergy, among others, but who they didn't believe are blessed, I guess is the word I want to use. Now, if you caught my phrase when I said that this group is now defunct, the reason it is defunct is because it was sued for $500,000 by a Catholic bishop from New Hampshire for defamation. As a result of that lawsuit, the organization that ran the website went out of business, as it were, and the website was shut down. Now, that's interesting enough that the place that Marjorie Taylor Greene gave an interview to was shut down for essentially lying about clergy members, but it's not perhaps the most interesting thing about that website. The other thing about that website that will catch your attention is that the founder of St. Michael's Media. Now, St. Michael's Media was the parent company which operated that media outlet, Church Militant. Its founder was a gentleman by the name of Michael Voris. Michael Voris was forced to resign. The official news release from the organization said that he had been asked to resign for breaking the morals clause of his contract. How did he break the morals clause of his contract, you ask? Well, he broke it by sending unsolicited, shirtless selfies to male staff members. You literally can't make this stuff up. So yes, while Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to put herself up on some sort of pious pedestal, the associations that she keeps and the outlets that she aligns herself with leave quite a bit to be desired. Now, obviously, Marjorie Taylor Greene had nothing to do with the events that got this gentleman forced to resign. However, they all fall under the same umbrella of these people who should be paying more attention to the beam in their own eye than trying to worry about the splinters that they see in everyone else. This fake spiritual superiority that they all put forth is just that. It's fake. It's performative, and no more performative than in the case of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has done any number of things in the past to prove that she struggles with the concept of what it is to be a good Christian. Okay, so that brings us to this episode's deep dive, subject of which I wanted to discuss this week is that of RFK Jr. On the off chance that you have been in a coma or somehow managing to avoid any news or social media for the past few months, I'll start off by explaining that RFK Jr. is Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. He is the son of Robert F. Kennedy, who was running for president in 1968, member of the ultra-famous Kennedy family. RFK Jr. is the nephew of President Kennedy. He is a lawyer by trade, and over the years he has done various legal work for a number of different entities, environmental work, and particular importance for the subject we're going to talk about today is I wanted to talk a little bit about his education, just so that we're all on the same page. RFK Jr. went to Harvard as an undergrad, where he earned a BA in American history and literature. He graduated in 1976 from Harvard. He went on to the University of Virginia School of Law, where he graduated from in 1982, and then went on for a Master of Laws degree from Pace University in 1987. Now, conspicuously missing from that section of his resume, as you may have noticed, is anything that has to do with health, medicine, nutrition, or anything related to one of those three disciplines. Perhaps the best way to describe RFK Jr. in the way he's known in most circles is as an avid conspiracy theorist. A little bit of background on his education, because that will be an important issue as we continue this topic, is he has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Harvard University that he graduated from Harvard in 1976 with a Bachelor of Arts in American history and literature. Then he went on to the University of Virginia School of Law, where he graduated in 1982, and then obtained a Master of Laws degree from Pace University in 1987. Conspicuously missing from that portion of his resume, as you might have noticed, is anything that has to do with medicine, anything that has to do with health, anything that has to do with nutrition. Yet, even with those gaping holes in his education and training, RFK Jr. has put himself forward as an expert on many aspects of those sciences, so much to the successful that he has been appointed the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the new Trump administration. I'll be the first one to admit that I really don't have a lot of room for tolerance in my heart for conspiracy theorists in general. The conspiracy theorists that I've had the opportunity to listen to and look into, they all seem to have a lot of things in common. For one thing, they don't take well to information that works against any of their confirmed ideas. That in and of itself is a big problem. So many of the conspiracy theorists, particularly ones who talk about the subjects that RFK talks about that have to do with medicine and science and nutrition, like to put themselves out there as people who are in the know and have more information or are willing to give you more information than the folks who are in the mainstream of the field. Conspiracy theorists, generally speaking, like to quote anecdotal evidence. And when I say anecdotal evidence, what I'm talking about is probably best described if I compare it to the opposite. When you see on the news or you read things that there was a study that was done by X university or X doctor or X scientist, the generally accepted way that these things are done is that the experiments are done in a reproducible way, meaning that anyone with the information that the original experimenter used could reproduce the experiment. And by virtue of that, then the contents of the findings of these scientists are then peer-reviewed. Other scientists with similar bona fides then take the information that is presented from the results of the experiments and they try to reproduce it. And then they report on their success or failure and give validity to the experiments and the conclusions of those experiments. This is a particular area where conspiracy theorists, especially conspiracy theorists that deal in health and medicine, are woefully missing the boat. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute when we talk about RFK's thoughts on autism. But first, I wanted to go through and talk about some of the conspiracy theories or less than scientific theories that he has espoused over the years. Now, first and foremost, from 2015 to 2023, Kennedy chaired the Children's Health Defense. This was a project that is extremely anti-vax in its policies or recommendations. It was formerly known as the World Mercury Project. They call themselves an anti-vaccine advocacy group. This group alleges that exposure to certain chemicals and radiation cause a wide range of conditions in many American children, including autism, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, food allergies, cancer, autoimmune diseases, and so forth. The Children's Health Defense has blamed and campaigned against vaccines, fluoridation of drinking water, paracetamol, which is acetaminophen, aluminum, and even wireless communications, things like Wi-Fi and cellular communications. Certainly the larger part of their focus has to do with vaccines, and particularly the idea that vaccines cause autism. While Kennedy was in his tenure with the Children's Health Defense, he focused on a subset of vaccines that contain thimerosal, which is a mercury-based antimicrobial that's used as a preservative, and has repeatedly falsely claimed that there is a connection between thimerosal and autism, even though One of the main vaccines that they target as dangerous is the MMR vaccine, which has never used thimerosal. So I guess we could say that's the first major flaw in the theory. But let's go through some of the other things that RFK has talked about in the past beyond the idea of vaccines causing autism. During COVID, he claimed that Fauci and Bill Gates intentionally exaggerated COVID. These statements were it came from a dinner that he attended where he also told fellow diners that COVID-19 was designed to target Caucasians and black people, claiming that Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people are immune to COVID, which is patently false. He also said at the same dinner that Russian and Chinese DNA should be collected by the United States so that we can target people by race, because he believes that ethnically charged microbes can be the future of warfare. He has promoted in the past the use of peptides, which are a potentially dangerous growth hormone, and he promotes them for weight loss and muscle development. He was one of the main voices who promoted disproven COVID treatments like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which, for all I know, may be the reason why he first endeared himself to the current president, who, as you remember, really seemed to like those two options for treatment. He has claimed that, as I mentioned earlier, wireless technology causes cancer, specifically 5G, and he also claims that it allows the government to control people's behavior through radio waves. In an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, he told Joe that Wi-Fi causes cancer and opens your brain-blood barrier to toxins. And I'm not saying after each one of these that there is no verifiable scientific evidence that any of these things are true. I guess unless I tell you different, that's the heading for all of these things. He has gone on record as promoting the idea that AIDS is really not caused by HIV. He says all HIV research is phony. He's a big advocate of the idea that fluoride causes disease. He has claimed on various occasions that fluoride is an, quote, industrial waste, end quote, and that it is associated with arthritis, bone fractures, bone cancer, IQ loss, neurodevelopmental disorders, and thyroid disease. He has said in the past that he believes mass shootings are connected to prescription drugs. He specifically targets drugs like Prozac, stating that before Prozac there were fewer shootings. And this whole post hoc ergo propter hoc sort of fallacy is going to pop up again in the autism discussion that we'll get into in a few moments here. But the idea that when something happens before another thing, it means that the first thing caused the second thing. It's a nonsense fallacy. To prove a causal relationship between a first event and a second event or a corresponding event, there needs to be more than just the idea that they both happened in the right sequence. He's also gone on record saying that he believes the 2004 presidential election was stolen from John Kerry. It should be noted that post-election investigations done by Democrats, if you remember, John Kerry was a Democrat, all found zero evidence of any tampering or election interference. He believes that the CIA assassinated his uncle, JFK. He's certainly not alone in that one, I guess. And finally, he believes that Sirhan was not really the one who shot his father, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., despite it happening in front of dozens of eyewitnesses. Yes, so again, these are all theories that he has put forth at one time or another that have no zero verifiable data to back them up. But the thing that I wanted to focus on mostly for today, just because of some of the things that have been going on recently, now that he is the director of HHS, that subject is autism. Now, to understand his position on autism, we have to go back to a gentleman by the name of Andrew Wakefield. Andrew Wakefield in 2008 was the first person to put forth a theory that there was a connection between autism and the MMR vaccine. He published a paper that started, well, maybe not the whole anti-vax craze, but certainly the part of it that deals with vaccines being a cause for autism. But there were some serious problems with his investigation. First and foremost, his study only included 12 children. Far too little for the type of scientific study that he wanted to complete. Further, when he submitted his paper on the results, he submitted only one case. One of those 12 children were the focus of the paper. So he took an already substandard data set and trimmed it down to a ridiculous one case. Later, when his study was investigated, it found out that he misreported details on all 12 of the children during the course of the experiment. And in a peer review, his conclusions were deemed to be haphazard and unscientific. So basically what he did was he took 12 kids who had autism and studied them, and from that derived that vaccines were the cause of the autism. Certainly by 2008, vaccinating children was commonplace. And the idea that the 12 kids who he studied all had autism in and of itself was nowhere near proof that any or all of them had autism for a specific reason, let alone the specific reason that he said. So even though this report was discredited by other scientists time and time again since 2008, it seems to be the prime mover in the movement these days attributing autism to vaccines. So now RFK Jr., as the head of HHS, is making, quote unquote, curing autism one of his goals. And to that end, he gave a rousing speech earlier this week where he talked about autism in a way that upset quite a few people, none more than folks with autism and their families. Here's a clip of that.
And these are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date.
A statement like that from a politician, let alone one who contends to be an expert in this area, is astounding. It demonstrates a ridiculous misunderstanding of what folks with autism are really like and what folks with autism's lives are like. And as a result, he's taken quite a bit of backlash from both people with autism themselves, autism advocacy groups. He's been, just pureed on social media. And in my opinion, that's not even the worst part. He has also announced his intention to create a database of persons who suffer from autism by using the available data that can be gleaned from both governmental databases and medical databases. Now, at best, this is a HIPAA violation. No one's information about any medical treatment, especially something like autism, should be given to anyone without the individual or the individual's parent or guardian's express permission. So right out of the gate, the idea is illegal according to HIPAA. But, for an administration who gets all disgruntled anytime anyone uses the word fascism or makes any references to history and compares this administration to other governments and other governmental actions, you would think that doing something like this would have immediately popped up on the radar as a bad idea. Making a list of folks with a particular ailment or disease or neurological condition or whatever, it does not pass the smell test. I don't want to go as far as to say that I agree with the folks who are throwing around the word eugenics, but I will say I think it's a terrible idea. I don't think that anyone should be compelled to have their information or their medical records included in any kind of a study, let alone a study that's going to be done by a politician with no scientific training. And that actually leads me to my last point. RFK announced recently who the gentleman is that he is appointing to spearhead this effort to investigate autism, and that is a gentleman by the name of David Geyer. Now, if you do a quick Google search on David Geyer, you'll find some pretty disturbing details in his biography. Most pertinent to this particular topic is the story about how he and his father were sanctioned in Maryland for, quote, endangering autistic children and exploiting their parents by administering a treatment protocol that has a known substantial risk of serious harm and which is neither consistent with evidence-based medicine nor generally accepted in the relevant scientific community. Now, that quote is directly from the court paperwork. What they did was they performed an experimental treatment on autistic children where they administered a drug to stop puberty. This drug is called Lupron. It suppresses hormone production. It was unclear exactly what the point was of their work, where they what they were exactly doing, why stunning the growth of these children or stopping their puberty, how it was relevant to what they were doing. But it was deemed as I said, dangerous and exploitative by the state of Maryland. His father was eventually lost his medical license for other missteps. David Geyer was fined $10,000. David Geyer has a bachelor's degree in biology. Now, if you're not familiar with what a bachelor's degree in biology entitles you to do, it entitles you to teach biology at a middle school or high school level, assuming that you also have a teacher's certificate. A bachelor's degree in biology does not qualify you as a medical expert, and it certainly doesn't qualify you to do medical experiments on children. So, I mean, let's put this all together. We have RFK Jr., who is a known conspiracy theorist and promotes some of the most fringe theories in both medicine and other areas that are out there today. He hasn't mentioned flat earth yet. I'm waiting for that one next, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised. So that's where we start with. We throw in the idea that he has no medical training, no education in health or medicine or science of any kind. Add in the idea that he is a firm proponent of the idea that vaccines cause autism and that autism is not genetic, which is what the best scientists of today assert. And for the icing on the cake, we throw in David Geyer, the gentleman who's already been sanctioned once for doing inappropriate experiments on children, and this is the guy that he puts in charge of the project. Now, am I being alarmist when I say that I think that this is a horrible idea and a recipe for disaster? I don't think that that's an unreasonable conclusion to come to with this, especially then when you consider the idea that he wants to put this database together, or he wants to collect all this data from these various databases under the heading of evaluating the data. I know we'll talk about more of the Trump cabinet as episodes go on, because RFK Jr., he may be the biggest problem in the cabinet. He's certainly not the only problem in the cabinet. I think, one of the most alarming things about this is when you go on social media and you see people posting and repeating all these various statements, statements by RFK, but statements by other anti-vaxxers that are just, easily disproven. But it doesn't matter, because the hallmark of a conspiracy theorist is that they don't accept any proof. If you tell a flat earther that the world is round because NASA has pictures of the Earth from space, their answer is that NASA's in on the scam. So that's the answer that you get from anti-vaxxers, and that's the answer that you get from people who believe that autism is caused by vaccines. If the science doesn't prove it, it's because the science isn't honest, and it's all part of a large cabal of scientists who are knowingly putting forth false information for some mystical gain that, I don't know what that gain is. I'm not sure how anybody thinks that a group that large, and I'll say the same thing if we talk about climate change or flat earthers or anti-vaxxers, they all seem to think that there are massive amounts of people who are able to keep these incredibly sought after secrets, and no one ever spills the beans. In my experience, that's not how secrets work. The more people know, the less likely that secret is going to be kept. And we're talking in cases like this, thousands upon thousands of people who would have to be in on it and never intentionally or accidentally clue anyone in. All right, that brings us to the end of this episode. I appreciate you all for sticking with me and my scratchy voice. I swear that wasn't a gimmick because I was talking about RFK. I really do have a scratchy voice, among other things going on right now. But I think I made it through pretty well. As far as episode 3, we'll see what the hot topics are, but for a deep dive, I want to talk about authoritarianism. The word's getting thrown around a lot, particularly since Trump took office and in the days leading up to that. So we'll talk a little bit about exactly what that means, how worried should we be, and what can we do about it. So thank you once again for downloading and listening to Your Neighbor on the Left. My name is Don Spielis, and I will see you when I see you.